was infamous for its hard way of life. Secluded and bleak, the former fortress had gained notoriety for being the most feared of France's many prisons, a place Louis XIV chose personally to send men he deemed most deserving of its harsh walls. There would be no visitors, no contact with other inmates, no reading and no exercise. A divisive ruler. Each man stood accused of disappointing the king. Louis XIV himself divided opinion. To admirers and supporters, he was the Sun King, a man of substance and strength, and France under his reign had grown in both stature and territory. Those who cared less for him spoke of a tyrant, a man who believed in absolutism and the notion that he acted as God's representative on earth. Such was this conviction, according to those who disliked him and his reign, that France had become a police state. In 1681, Saint-Mars was appointed governor of the Exiles fort in what is now Italy, and it was decreed that the mysterious prisoner was to move with him. The same thing happened again 6 years later when Saint-Mars was to take over at Sainte Marguerite prison on the Mediterranean coast. It was on that journey that rumour began to spread that the prisoner in the constant charge of Saint-Mars did in fact wear a mask. The two men stayed in Sainte Marguerite for only a year before Saint-Mars became governor of the Bastille prison in Paris. An official there wrote in his focusing on the large royal family. The king's son, Louis de Bourbon, had been banished for being outed as homosexual. He tried to regain favour by fighting in the campaign in Flanders, where it is said he died. However, others suggested that he had instead been banished to prison and concealed behind the mask. Other theories point to a French general named Vivien de Boulogne, imprisoned for withdrawing troops from the siege of Canio and abandoning wounded servicemen. Another argument, first made by the English politician Hugh Cecil, was that the prisoner was the king's father, Louis XIII, stating that at the king's birth his father had been estranged from his mother for many years, and his real father had been sent away, masked for the rest of his life. So this now is Enigma number 33. Who was Beethoven's immortal beloved? The date is 1812. The location, Tbilisi, the Czech Republic. The revered German composer Ludwig van Beethoven once wrote a letter to his immortal beloved. The letter was seemingly never sent, and the identity of his beloved has baffled scholars for 200 years. Ludwig van Beethoven, composer and pianist, was one of the greatest musicians to put notes to paper. Among his many lauded musical feats, Beethoven is seen as a crucial pioneer in the development of classical music's Romantic era. In 1810, at the height of Beethoven's fame, the German Romantic author E.T.A. Hoffmann wrote about him in the same breath as Mozart and Joseph Haydn, calling them the three masters of instrumental compositions who breathe one and the same romantic spirit. Beethoven had been heavily influenced by Mozart and had met and learned from Haydn, his music becoming famous all over Europe. But for all the romance and passion that his musical talents gave the world, his own love life was by no means a symphony. So here is a painting of Beethoven. The composer did find romance and even love, but he was hindered by position and status. Born in Bonn, Germany in late 1770, Beethoven, the son of a musician, was a promising young pianist who moved to Vienna to start a career in music at the age of 22. It was here that he first studied with Haydn before having his first mature work published in 1795. He would remain living in Vienna unmarried until his death in 1809. insisted she withdraw from him. 3 years later, she married the Baron von Stackelberg. That same year, it is thought that Beethoven himself had proposed unsuccessfully to Therese Malfatti, a musician in Vienna, but being the daughter of a wealthy merchant, Beethoven was again scorned. He turned once more to his music, this time dedicating his famous piece for Sonata, number 24, that Beethoven nicknamed Arteries. The Countess's diary entries talk of a deep regard for Beethoven, and they did write to each other, often romantically. It is, though, these very diary entries that point to her younger sibling, Josephina. In one extract, Therese asks why, as a widow, doesn't her sister take Beethoven as a husband, calling him Josephina's cellmate. It is Josephina, then, who most scholars believe to be Beethoven's beloved, but it seems the world will never know for sure. And this is an image of her here. Okay, so now we go on to Enigma number 34. Why did Leatherman walk? The date is circa 1857 to 1889, and the location, Connecticut and New York. In the 19th century, a man dressed in leather walked continuously through the American countryside, but it has never been established who he was or why he was doing it. From around 1857 until 1889, a mysterious figure clad head to toe in leather walked a circuit of 365 miles through Connecticut and New York State, which he would complete precisely every 34 days, whatever the weather. Leatherman would walk between the Connecticut and Hudson rivers, from Saybrook to Greenwich, then inland, and on a loop through towns such as Ossining, Yorktown, North Salem, Bridgewater, Forestville, and New Britain. The first time I saw him walking through my parents' farm, I was a very small boy, Walter Whitson has recalled. He scared the life out of me, and I began to run for all I was worth. A strange-looking character, Leatherman's leather suit made him look larger than he was and gave him an uncomfortable gait. So, this is a picture of him here. It looks like he wore a unique handmade suit. He was also largely silent. He didn't speak to those he passed, and if he needed to communicate, he would do so with grunts and hand gestures. Those who attempted to speak with him can only recall him using a few words in broken English. A local celebrity. Over time, Leatherman would grow less scary and be embraced by local communities who grew accustomed to seeing him walk through their towns. He would knock on the back doors of houses and ask for a meal, but not with words, rather by pointing to his mouth. He would be served a meal outside and then be on his way with possibly only a bow, a grunt, or nothing at all. And then 34 days later, he would knock at the same house for another meal. Without fail, it was every 34 days later, time and time again. These houses knew exactly when to expect him. People would mark on their calendars when to expect the Leatherman. They would even miss the Sunday school picnic so they could be there to feed him. Sarah Foote, who interviewed many people who met Leatherman, has said they would bake hot biscuits especially for him and have them waiting for him. These people liked the Leatherman because they enjoyed doing something kind for someone. Leatherman became something of a local celebrity, and communities would watch him walk through their town. Some treated him with more distrust and suspicion, He always declined, and instead would spend each night in shelters made of rocks. To keep warm, he would make a campfire and indulge his one great pleasure, smoking tobacco from a handmade pipe. Sometimes local children would sit with him, but there was no conversation, just the crackle of the fire. And this is one of the caves that he would find shelter in. Meeting his end. Leatherman managed to live outside for all those years, although many assumed that the famous blizzard of 1888 would claim him. He survived it, and was only delayed on his loop by 4 days. Toward the end of that same year, the Humane Society had him arrested and taken to a hospital so that a sore on his face could be treated. It was found to be cancer, but Leatherman managed to escape the confines of the hospital and returned to his route. On March 24, 1889, Leatherman's body was discovered in one of his rock shelters in Sawmill Wood on the farm of George Dell in Mount Pleasant, New York. He had died of his cancer. On the day he was buried, he commanded front-page obituaries in the New York Sun and Hartford Times. Leatherman was buried in Sparta Cemetery, next to a road, but his followers campaigned for a more appropriate and peaceful burial site, which was granted in May 2011. However, when his original coffin was dug out, all that was found was some dirt and nails. There was no body or bones to test for DNA. The dirt and nails were placed in a new plain pine coffin and buried at a new site at Ossining, New York. His tombstone simply reads, "The Leatherman." Alternative theories. So why did Leatherman live this life as a wandering hermit? And what was his true identity? In December 1888, the New York press reported that his name was Jules Bouclay, and that he was from Lyon in France, where he had grown up as the son of a carpenter. He had fallen in love with Margaret Laron, the daughter of a leather merchant, who agreed to marry him if he proved himself a success in her father's business. Leatherman made some poor investments and ultimately ruined the business, which would see the wedding cancelled. He suffered a mental breakdown and was placed in a Paris hospital